Welcome to today's Funding and Policy Update webinar with myself, Bryony Kingsland, Head of Funding and Policy Insight at City and Guilds, and my colleague Eric Oliver, who's our Funding and Policy Advisor. So today's webinar will run in the usual way. We will be covering a variety of updates and changes that are happening in the funding and policy landscape in post-16 education. For those of you, I think most people are used to using GoToWebinar and Zoom and Teams now, but just in case we have any new colleagues, in the top right-hand corner of your screen, you should see an orange arrow. If you click that, you will get a little dashboard popping out. In that dashboard, you will see the opportunity to ask questions. Please do type your questions into the question box during the webinar. We have a space at the end of this session to answer as many questions as we can get to. This is our first webinar of this term. If there are any major policy changes or announcements, we will hold another webinar before the end of term. If there aren't, then the next webinar will be early in the new year in January or February. For our next one, we try to do at least one webinar a term, but if it's busy on policy announcements and there's lots happening, then we do two. And that should be 2 TWO rather than 2 TOO for the captions, and sometimes even 3 if it's particularly busy. So please do use the question section to ask your questions. There's nothing happening today, as far as I'm aware, to interrupt our webinar. The only thing I will say is I have been having a few network problems. We are having some IT upgrades done inside City and Guilds, and my new laptop has occasionally played up. I'm really hoping that it's not going to drop off today and poor Eric won't have to pick up my section of the webinar because he hasn't practiced a run through on that one with me. So hopefully everything will run smoothly, and you'll have Eric in the first section, and he is going to cover for our agenda today the apprenticeship update and the 16 to 19 update, and then we will move on to adult skills and the qualification reforms, and then a section for questions. We've got 1¼ hours. I'm hoping we won't have to use the whole 1¼ hours, and that you will get to leave early, but we never really know how many questions people are going to have, so we do just put the extra space in with our webinar for those questions just in case. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Eric so he can pick up the first 2 sections of this webinar, and I'll mute myself so that you can't hear me. Oh, actually, no, I can't mute myself, because if I mute myself, I think I mute Eric as well. So I'll try and stay quiet in the background whilst Eric's talking. So over to Eric.
Hello, everyone. I'm Eric, the Funding and Policy Advisor. I'm going to quickly go through the apprenticeships and 16 to 19 updates. I just want to quickly double check that everyone can hear me okay. I can't see the chat either, so if you don't mind telling me, Bryony.
I will just check and see if everyone's hearing you okay. Yep, it looks like everyone can hear you, Eric.
Ideal.
Just pop that out. Yes, I think so. Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Correct. Can we go to the next slide and I'll kind of get started?
Yeah.
Okay. So there have been a few changes recently with the apprenticeship levy, in particular relating to the apprenticeship levy transfers. For those of you who don't know, with the apprenticeship levy, large employers that pay the levy can transfer up to 25% of the funds each year to other businesses. You'll sometimes see people like councils will do this to send money across to local businesses. That kind of helps their KPIs as well. So that's been in place for some years now, but it can only be used for apprenticeship training and assessment up to the funding band maximum. So that's never to be used for kind of wages or anything like that. And by agreeing to transfer the levy funds, the employer does commit to pay a specific amount over the course of the apprenticeship. So generally, they'll have a bit of money leaving the account every month or so, right up until the end of the apprenticeship. But that is the only real thing that they're agreeing to do. The transferring employer has no other obligation to the apprentice other than paying for the apprenticeship. You might already know all of that, but the big current change is that from the 23rd of August 2023, if any employers have pledged an amount of money, so for instance, if a local council, if say Newcastle Council, have said, oh, if as long as you're in Newcastle and you are in construction, we have pledged £100,000, we will fund this apprenticeship. You can now get auto approval on these applications. So there is a website where employers can pledge these funds. And then now, if you want an apprenticeship and it covers specific criteria that the funding employer has set out, for instance, location, sector, type of job role, and the apprenticeship qualification level, and if that all fits and you apply for the funding, you can now get automatic approval. This is especially useful for some providers who may have SMEs, who are non-levy payers, who are a bit hesitant about paying that 5% co-investment amount. This means there's a bigger chance that they can get that funding and get it fully funded. So with that, like I said, it's quite handy for small employers. All you've got to do is go to the website at the bottom of the page, if you just search that up. And there is some things going at the minute. Some employers are pledging money with quite limited criteria as well. I think there's a few councils who've pledged money with just the location. So it's definitely worth having a look if you have them SMEs who want that funding and want an apprenticeship delivered but don't quite have the funds for the co-investment. The sending employers, the levy transferers can turn that off, and they can have 6 weeks to actually make a decision if they want to. But after that 6 weeks, then it'll get to a point where it is auto approved. Cool. Can we go to the next slide, please? As many of you might have heard, the Register of Apprenticeship Training Providers and the Register of Endpoint Assessment Organisations has recently fused to become the Apprenticeship Provider and Assessment Register, also known as APAR, which means you all have a nice new acronym to learn. Providers can join the APAR as training providers if they show they're an employer that pays the levy and wants to train their own workforce or apprentices, so employer providers. They are a provider nominated by an employer that has shown a gap in the apprenticeship provision offer, or they are a provider in an area the government wants to grow or where a capacity issue has been identified. So for instance, currently the big word on the street via government and providers and employers is green skills, for instance. So that could be an area to explore. In getting on the APAR, it is they've ultimately brought it forward just to make the system a little bit more efficient, everyone being on the same system, and it has kind of streamlined it a little bit. Can we get the next slide, please? Excellent. This one is breaking news. It's come out yesterday, this pilot. So the government have brought forward an expert apprenticeship training provider pilot. And effectively, if you are a good apprenticeship provider, if you have good employer feedback, and if you have a good track record of delivering apprenticeships, you can possibly apply to get on this pilot. And you get given a few things as part of this pilot. You get access to your SMEs, apprenticeship service accounts, also known as the AS or DAS accounts. And if you get access, I know a lot of providers can have some difficulties, and it can be a bugbear training small employers to use these accounts. So if you have direct access yourself as a training provider, it can make things a little bit easier, and it can also have some admin costs. You also get an expert qualification stamp, which you can kind of use in marketing. So you get an expert quality mark, which can be on your billboards, on your adverts, which could then possibly lead to additional funding. Well, not additional funding, sorry, additional starts, which lead to additional funding. It can help bring in more people to your course and to your provider. You can also get priority engagement opportunities with DFE through roundtables and workshops, as well as scheduled access to DFE officials. This provides a few things, but most notably, it kind of gives you a seat at the table, so to speak, which gives you a chance to both mould the apprenticeship system and this pilot. Having access to these providers, to DFE officials, can be quite beneficial to a provider. You can tell your bugbears to people who have more power to make change. So it's definitely worth having a look at. But there is no direct funding benefits. You don't get additional funding for being part of this pilot. But like I said, with the expert quality mark, any additional marketing potentials, it can result in more starts, a better reputation, which then can result in more funding overall. Cool. We'll go to the next slide, please. And yep, we'll go on to the 1619 funding and policy. There we go. Okay, so as you might know, with the recent strikes and industrial action, the government have committed to increasing some salaries of employers. And the way they've funded this is by the following. They've put 500 million to be put in at FE funding to cover the staff wage increases. That's 185 million for this year, this academic year, and 285 million for the next academic year. The funding has been put through the 16 to 19 funding formula, and it's using the following methods. The cost weighting for higher cost subject areas has increased, which ultimately means the funding you get for high cost subjects, such as engineering and medicine, will increase or has increased. I'll show you more about that on the next slide once we get to it. On top of that, there is a £55 increase in funding for learners who have recently left care, increasing that funding to £559 per year. And they've also provided an increase on disadvantaged funding for learners who have not yet achieved a grade 4 to 9 level 2 English or maths qualification. And this funding is based on the band the learner is on. And again, I've got this in a later slide, so we'll go in a bit more detail with this. So the increase per funding for each student, they've increased the base rate, and that's by about 4.6%. So each student at the very start has an increase in funding, and that is again how they've kind of got this staff wages. And they've also increased the base rate for T-level funding by 10%, partially as a result of the additional costs related with delivering T-levels. And now the big part of this is that there's no noted increase for the 19 plus learners for this review, which means it provides more advantages to colleges than it does training providers, who are more likely to deliver 16 to 19 provision. And that's kind of, yeah, there is some changes to the 19 plus funding landscape, which Bryony will go into a little bit more detail going forward. But in this particular review, it has focused on the 16 and 19 landscape. Can we go to the next slide, please? There we go. So here are the new increased rates for funding. You'll see at the right-hand side, that was the old rate, and just to the left of that is the new rate. So a learner on band 5 would initially be on £4,542 a year, and now that's increased to £4,753. And that is for this academic year. So these are the new funding rates that the learners can get, or providers can get for the learners. And we'll jump to the next slide, please. And this is what I was mentioning before regarding the program cost weightings, or the ratings for the higher expense courses, and also for the funding for the English and maths. So to the left, you can see the rates there. So for instance, with this one, a low rate might be something that costs a little bit less to deliver, and maybe say a business admin course, which can just be a few kind of lectures. Whereas a very high course, for instance, could be something in health and social care or healthcare, where they've got to be out and about, they need more equipment, and it does cost more money to deliver. And the way this is increased is you'll see on the left, that was the old rate, to the right is the new one. So if we look at the high rate, for instance, the way it works in the formula is you would have used to get about 30% additional funding. Now that's increased to about 39% additional funding on top of the base rate. So they are pushing more money towards these higher cost courses. And to the right, we can see the new disadvantaged funding rates for learners who have not yet achieved the level 4 to 9 English and maths. These are kind of yearly rates, and this is just a block amount of money that goes straight to the provider, and it is used to just fund the additional costs to deliver them English and maths courses. Can we go to the next slide, please? And here we have the 16 to 19 funding bands for T levels. And again, to the right, you'll see the old rates, and just to the left, you'll see the new rates. Obviously, it differs quite a bit depending on the size of the T level. And similarly, those program cost weightings for the different subject sector areas and the more expensive ones, they are also impact these. So if you have a very kind of high cost T level, you will get increases on funding as well. Can we just jump to the next slide, please? And with that, with the T levels, the government have announced some additional employer support funding to help them bring on more T level placements for providers. Ultimately, the maximum is £25,000 across all placements they're hosting via each employer. So if you're an employer who has one start, you can claim up for £25,000, and if you have 200 starts, it's still the maximum of £25,000. This is just to kind of manage costs a little bit. The employers can't claim for placements that started before the 1st of April 2023. The fund is for industry placements that began after the 1st of April 2023 and before the 31st of March 2024. It is an opt-in scheme. All T-level providers are allocated an amount of money based on their T-level student numbers, and each provider will get a set amount. It is ultimately down to the provider how they work with this funding. They are responsible for validating the claims, making the payment to the employer once they've agreed a start date or the placement has started, and submitting data on the claims paid out to. That is all down to the provider. And once the providers have spent the full allocation, they'll make no further payments. It is set, so beyond that, they can't make any payments. And the DFL will claim any unspent funds in August 2024. Can we go to the next slide, please? Oh, sorry, bit too far.
Sorry.
The eligible cost for a T-level placement. So this is relating to the last slide, the £25,000 per employer. So there are some legitimate costs associated with housing a T-level industry placement student, which could include administrative costs, like setting up processes and procedures, organizational systems, a physical workspace to support delivery, training costs, such as training existing staff to develop the knowledge, intangible costs, such as equipment, insurance, security passes, mandatory training, software licensing, materials and supplies, supervisory and transportation costs, and additional training for the student. And again, this all goes through the training provider. So the employers will go straight to the training provider. They will ask for what they want relating to the eligible costs, and it's ultimately up to the provider if they accept the payments or not. So it might be that if you do a construction course and you need a hard hat and a pair of steel-toed shoes for the learner, that the provider accepts that. But in something else, they might not accept it, for instance. So if there's a process and procedure that they believe is already in place, for example, they may not accept that payment, but it is ultimately down to the provider. And I think that's my section. So I'll pass over to Bryony.
That is your section. Thanks, Eric. Now, again, we seem to have problems with the captioning, so I do apologise if we've got any hard of hearing colleagues, because obviously it just doesn't seem to like you, Eric. I'm really sorry. It doesn't pick up what you're saying. It may well be that your laptop's got some issues. I don't know. We'll have to investigate that further with our tech team and see what we can come up with. Although we are thinking potentially about moving to a new platform at some point and hoping that we can find a platform where the captioning works more effectively. So, moving on, adult skills update. Obviously, there's a fair amount happening in the 16 to 19 space, but there's an awful lot coming at us and happening at the moment in the adult skills space as well. I'm not going to cover the funding rules because we did cover the funding rules changes at the last webinar we did back earlier this year in the summer term. So hopefully most of you were on that webinar and you will have had access to it or got the recording afterwards. And I did forget to say at the beginning of this session that we are recording it and we will send out a copy of the slides and a recording as per usual. We always do this with all of our webinars to everybody that registered for this webinar. So even if you can't attend, you will get a copy, but if you're an attendee, you will get a copy to share with your teams. So without further ado, so earlier on this year, the DFE announced the response to their implementing the funding and accountability reforms, and that was the consultation they did last year. and they've made some more announcements, and they've made some more changes, and some interesting information has come out, which I'm hoping I'll be able to show you in a moment. It will mean coming out of my current PowerPoint slide and moving to a spreadsheet, and I'm hoping that will work well and easily with GoTo, so that I can actually show you something that's live at the moment that we've been working on. But as part of these DFE, Department for Education, funding and accountability reforms, some of you will know some of this, but I'll just quickly whiz through. They're basically merging community funding, the adult education budget, the national free courses for jobs level 3 offer, into the adult skills fund from next year. So that will be one fund that providers will have more flexibility in the use of. And I think that will give you as providers more choice about where you spend your money and how you spend your money with your learners to meet local needs more effectively. But within that, there are going to be some constraints about what you can deliver, because obviously we've got reforms of qualifications coming at us, and I'll be covering that in a minute. And we've also got reforms to the funding attached to adult skills qualifications, and that might actually prompt you to look at the funding attached to a particular qualification you deliver now and decide to not deliver it in preference to another qualification which has received increased funding as part of those changes. So I'll talk more about that in a minute. So that's definitely one. When it comes to starting to plan your curriculum for 24-25, I'm pretty sure that all of you, whether you're an independent training provider or an FE college, will be looking very closely with your adult budget at what you want to deliver, linked obviously to the LSIPs and sector priorities, but also to those changes to the funding attached to individual qualifications on occasion. The other thing that the government are working on is accountability agreements, and that's a different type of contract. At the moment, you have, if you're an FE college, a grant-based contract, and an ITP, you have a contract for services. And those contracts hold you to specific agreements that the DFE and ESFA expect you to adhere to. And that generally is around providing financial information, obviously providing accurate and timely ILR responses, etc. An accountability agreement works in a slightly different way. Now, I don't know what these accountability agreements are going to look like yet. I know what they look like in Scotland. I know what they look like in Wales, where basically providers are given a funding amount and they agree up front with the government approximately what they're going to deliver that year in terms of qualifications, courses or programs in a particular sector subject area. So they might say in their accountability agreement and their accountability plan, which providers will be submitting to the government, that they're going to deliver approximately 200 engineering qualifications at different levels. So we'll see how those accountability agreements look when they're published. We will do a thorough analysis of them if the government publishes what they're going to look like, and we'll do a webinar for you at the time so you can understand the differences in those accountability agreements versus your current contracting arrangements. Obviously setting national skills priorities, that's LSIPs, which have all recently been published. So all of you will be in an LSIP area. There are 36 LSIP regions. Each of those 38 regions has a local skills improvement plan, which identifies what the sector and occupational priorities are for the region in which you're working. And the government is expecting providers' accountability plans to reflect those learning and skills improvement plans priorities. So that's definitely something that your senior teams or yourselves will be working on for the next few months to make sure that you can get your accountability plan in place, that it reflects local skills improvement plan priorities, and the government will accept it. They're introducing new adult skills funding bands for qualifications, and I'll look at that in more detail in a moment, so I'm not going to talk too much about that now. And as from this year, allowing eligible providers to earn up to 3% of your adult skills funding for the development of new innovative provision in partnership with employees, and that's provision which meets employers' needs but isn't necessarily a qualification. Now, Personally, I think this is quite key, because one thing I've noticed whilst reading the learning and skills, the local skills improvement plans is, and having conversations when I'm out and about meeting employers and meeting providers across England, is that many employers are saying that in the adult space, they're not so interested in qualifications, but what they are interested in is skills. And I think over the coming sort of years, that interest in skills rather than qualifications is going to increase as far as employers are concerned. Obviously, for individual learners, qualifications are still important and will remain important, but employers are more interested in skills, and what they're really wanting is sort of more short, sharp provision over the coming years that will address skill shortages quickly and effectively for them. So that innovative provision allocation and allowance is really sort of beginning to move some of our 19+ provision towards that. The other thing they want to do is move to a multi-year funding approach, which will give providers a much better chance of planning your provision over a longer term period. And I think that will really help. We still don't know quite what that will look like yet, so we need to see the outcome of that, hopefully sometime soon. And the other thing they want to do is ensure that adult skills fund provision is primarily focused on progression into employment, but also supporting wider outcomes, and the qualification reforms that the DfE are implementing at the same time as this are also linked to that progression into employment or progression onto higher levels of education and training. The other bit of work which they're doing, which I know is a challenge, because obviously each mayoral combined authority area has their own views on what a national funding model should look like, and there are 10 mayoral combined authorities, and the Department of Education is trying to work with all of those 10 mayoral combined authorities to introduce a national funding model to strengthen both accountability and the devolved skills funding landscape. That's mainly because there are differences across the MCAs, and sometimes that can be a struggle for employers and for learners. And we have had a bit of a postcode lottery in some areas, which doesn't really promote fairness in access to improving skills and improving career opportunities and improving the sort of 19+ skills landscape. So they are trying to introduce a national funding model, but that has its challenges, so we'll have to watch and see how that one develops and how DfE do in introducing that. But it is really down to the MCAs and DfE to come to some final agreement. And when you've got 10 MCAs and the DfE, that's never going to be easy and straightforward. So I'm not expecting that or any news on that imminently, to be frank. That link at the bottom there takes you to the government response to the accounting and funding and accountability reforms. And there's a sizable page there telling you exactly what's happening and when. And we'll have a look at some of the whens now. So we all know about the enhanced Ofsted inspections, although we have got a new Ofsted chief inspector, and they are looking at the Ofsted inspection process at the moment, and so I think we can expect some changes there. They want to make the inspection process better for providers, so that's definitely one to watch. There have been a few announcements and webinars and workshops on what the new chief inspector is looking at and what we can expect, but they haven't published anything yet on how they might make the current EIF education inspection framework more provider and user friendly, so we'll watch out for that. Single improvement plans, they've all been implemented. Accountability agreements, as you can see there, they are currently being developed with a view to implementing them in 23-24 and 24-25. Now, they haven't been implemented in 23-24 as far as I'm aware. Some of you might be piloting some of that. So I'm expecting that to really start happening in 24-25 for the majority of providers. The performance dashboard, I think, is actually implemented now. I'm pretty sure that's in place for most of you. And then the funding reforms, innovative provision, that's been developed and it's been implemented. So most providers have access to that AEB innovative provision strand as from this year. They're still consulting on the funding framework and working on developing that, and that will be implemented in 24-25. The Adult Skills Fund, which is the merging of the variety of different 19+ strands of funding is in development this year for implementation next year. The new funding rates, which have been announced, and I'll show you some of those in a moment, is for implementation next year. And then reforming of the non-qualification provision, that's in development during this year for implementation next year. So we can expect more announcements on the non-qualification provision changes and reforms at some point during the 2023-2024 academic year. So adult funding rates. So after our last webinar, the ESFA announced some of the changes to the adult funding rates for 24-25. And we have done an analysis of that to look at all the qualifications that City and Guilds has and where they are losing funding from the current weighted funding rate and where some of them are gaining funding on the weighted funding rate. There are more gains than losses in here, as you will be, I'm sure, pleased to know, which is great. But we have got some fabulous losses in this area. So I'm just going to try and escape from here and look at, and you'll have to tell me, hopefully I'll still be able to see the dashboard. So I'll still be able to check to make sure you can see this when I make the change and bring up this. Now, can someone tell me in the chat, can you actually see the spreadsheet that I've just popped up as opposed to the slides? Yes, you can. Brilliant. Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Sarah. That's great to know that you can actually see this. So let's have a look at this, shall we? So here you've got the qualifications list. You've got the qualification title and the learning overall on the far side. I am going to share this spreadsheet. I'm still doing some final updates to it, but I'm going to share this spreadsheet in some shape or form to all attendees, probably actually on our website, and then we'll send out a focus alert to let you know that it's there. But for the moment, I'm just going to show you what some of the changes are. So this is the general qualifications list. As you can see at the bottom here, we've got a specialist land-based and then the functional skills. In actual fact, the functional skills aren't changing at all. Whereas this sheet, we've got most of the changes. So here you've got the new in column 0, you've got the new skills funding rate for academic year 24-25. And we've highlighted in red where that qualification is losing money from the current weighted rate. As you can see here, we've mainly got green, so we've mainly got increases, and some of them, as you can see here, are sizable increases. So you can see here the advanced technical extended diploma in health and care here is getting an increased funding rate of an additional 1,667 on top of its current funded rate, and the new rate from next year will be 9,072. Which is a big increase. And the other one below that, the level 3 advanced technical diploma in health and care at 540 guided learning hours, is getting a new funding rate of 4536, which is an increase of 1654 on the previous weighted funding rate. So just scrolling down, you can see here the bulk of them are actually increases, and you can see here in column P, this is the actual increase that, hang on, I can't do it. It's so annoying when I can't do this. Let's just shrink that slightly. Bring that up here. So I scroll back up here, you can just see that this is make that a little bit bigger. Never easy with the dashboard showing because it cuts out some access to our scrolling buttons. So here you can see you've got the difference in skills funding in column P and the new skills funding rate in column O. So I'll just make that large again. Scroll back across. So if we scroll on down, you can see that most of them are getting increases, and there are some sizable chunky increases, but we are seeing some here where you're actually getting shrinkage in the skills funding rate. So you've got an early years practitioner here, which has lost 319. Then you've got some sizable chunky losses off a group of here. So you've got almost 1,000 off this one, which is countryside and environment. And I will say that actually, sorry for those of you that are land-based providers or have land-based provision, but the land-based has actually been hit a little hard in areas in terms of the funding that you will be getting for certain qualifications, which does seem a little bit unfair. because we know that land-based is going to be increasingly important going forward in terms of being a priority sector for delivery, because of the changes we're going to need to make to agri-tech and horticulture, particularly when it comes to growing food for the planet. So they're important areas and will remain important priority areas, but for some reason we seem to have some serious losses to qualification funding rates in the land-based sector. So scrolling on down, you can see here that, yeah, land-based, wildlife management, land-based studies, tractor driving, etc., all-terrain vehicles, forklift truck, they've all had some losses. And then going on down, you can see there's a sizable loss for this one, which is 90 credit diploma in land-based technology. And continuing on down, there's an increase in the forest machine operations. We've got a sizable loss here in the practical horticultural skills. Then we've got minor losses to some and some increases there. So there's an increase in the diploma in floristry, and there is an increase in the technical diploma in horticulture of 759. So you've got one advanced technical diploma, 540 guided learning hours at level 3, which does actually have an increase of £759. And then further on down, so you can see how we've done with this analysis. You can see what it's doing. This one, which is the NVQ level 3 qualification in fabrication and welding, has lost a sizable chunk of money. But in actual fact, that is no longer funded at the moment from 31st of August. We are looking at what we will do with that, but with the loss in money, we're not sure it's actually worth extending it back out again. Be interested to know if there's anybody that would see that as a real issue. So we'll be looking at that after this event. And then keeping on down here, you're losing 500, 800, 900 from manufacturing operations, 800 from engineering track maintenance, and then some increases of 800, 900 in the rail engineering operative knowledge and in the maintenance mechanic competence qualification. And then a sizable increase here for diploma in gas utilisation, installation and maintenance, water heating and wet central heating. That has gone up by £6,000. That is a massive jump. So if any of you are thinking about delivering that diploma in gas utilisation, installation and maintenance, if you're not doing it, you may want to think about delivering that one, because it's now got a weighted funding rate of 14,650. So that's a sizable increase in funding for that particular qualification. And you've got another one here with an increase of 2,000, which is in carpentry. So some of the construction, all of the construction quals have received uplifts. There's barely any of them that have actually received a drop, apart from this one, which is multi-trade repair and refurbishment operations. That has received a drop. So most of those ones in the construction area have actually seen increases. We've got decreases in IT. In a lot of cases, there are some sizable decreases, but also some increases in the IT and digital side of things. And then, unfortunately, retail and warehousing, most of those have received, a lot of those have received a decrease. And some of the hair and beauty have received a decrease as well. Not massive decreases, but there is a decrease in funding. So as I say, we are going to send out this spreadsheet and make it available to you so you can see where the losses and gains are. Because when you're planning your curriculum next year, a lot of you are going to want to look at this and make some decisions on, you know, how much income and return on investment you're going to get for delivering these courses, and because it will make a difference to your overall college or provider income for the year. And I'll just take a very quick look at the land base, which we've done on a separate sheet to help you. So you can see here that we have got some sizable increases, but also some sizable decreases as well. So land-based agriculture and land-based, the technical diplomas in land and wildlife management, they've got sizable increases. So it does vary. There are some increases, but there are some big losses in the land-based area as well. I'm not quite sure why they've done that in the way that they have. It's just the decision that DFE and IFATE have made about where they place them, whether it's in the low, medium, high, or specialist high area in terms of what they get. And then you've got these, which the ones in yellow have just stayed at the same rate. So we will send that out to you so that you have got access to that post this webinar at some point. I've just got to do some final calculations and some final tidying up with that spreadsheet, but we will make it available to providers within the next few weeks. So do watch out for a focus alert on that when we send it out if you want to access it. There is actually a full sheet of all awarding bodies online somewhere. I have struggled to find it, I have to say, but somewhere, if you Google qualifications losing and gaining funding during the funding and accountability consultation, you should be able to find the full sheet for all awarding organisations. So that's that, and I'll skip past the last one because I thought, oh, hello, sorry. So those changes to weighted funding rate, that's just an example there that I put in as a slide, just so that you can see what we're producing in case I couldn't make the spreadsheet come up. So no point in going through that. But as part of this reforms, one of the things that we're noticing as part of this sort of weighted funding rates, but also getting funded attached to new qualifications is becoming increasingly challenging for awarding bodies like ourselves when we want to produce new qualifications that you or providers are asking us for. It is becoming increasingly difficult to submit those qualifications to the ESFA and get public funding attached to them so that you can deliver them easily with employers. I think there's several things going on here. Obviously, there's the qualification reforms, and the DfE want to make sure that qualifications are meeting their reform requirements. I'll talk more about that in a minute. But also, I've heard increasing noise inside DfE about DfE expecting employers to start stumping up more money in the 19+ space to get the skills they want. So, and a good example of this is we've recently worked with a lot of providers and employers to produce a retrofit advisor at level 3. It's a certificate. It's about 110 guided learning hours. It's exactly what employers and providers have told us that they need and want to fill the retrofit skills shortages that are out there. We submitted it for public funding to the ESFA and it has been rejected. So they are not going to fund it. Now, we know that actually with the level 2, that has sailed off the shelves. It's an expression that we use in terms of being funded, sometimes because individual mayoral combined authorities have requested that it be added to their own AEB offer, because mayoral combined authorities can request that a qualification is added to the adult education budget funded offer for their region only. So if you sit in an MCA and you want access to this qualification, it is regulated. You can ask your MCA if they would be willing to add it to the funded offer if you've got employers that are stating they need it. But what we're also noticing is that other government departments are beginning to add funding, skills funding into the ecosystem where they don't think that Department for Education are doing what they need to be doing. So recently, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero announced 8.85 million that providers could bid for up until the 25th of August to support delivery of heat pump and retrofit qualifications to already qualified construction workers to enable them to expand out their knowledge to become retrofit or heat pump specialists. So they've pumped money into the skills system. And I wanted to flag this because I think it's going to happen more and more potentially. And as providers, obviously, you are always looking to make sure you've got access to the best funding to work with your employers and to provide your learners with the skills they need. And I think it's just worth flagging that it's probably a good idea just to not always watch DfE, but to look to those other government departments like DESNES, Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, and the Department for Levelling Up Housing Security, who, as we know, are managing the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, because they also have their own funding and they are committing it more to skills in some areas because they know how desperately the employers that they talk to need those skills. So we know that the retrofit level 3 certificate was required and needed because providers and employers have told us it is. So even though it's not publicly funded, we're not hugely worried about it. I think it will be delivered as part of that DESNES funded offer, which goes up until March 2024. We've already had a couple of mayoral combined authorities request that it gets added to their adult education budget listing for their own funded offer. So it will get delivered in the mayoral combined authority regions. And we also know, because employers have told us us that they are more than willing to pay to have this qualification delivered to their workforce because they need it so desperately. And I think that's another thing for providers to think about as well going forward. More and more we're hearing employers say, well, some of the qualifications we would like to have delivered are no longer funded by the government, but we will pay for them if we need them. So if you've got business development teams inside your college or your training provider, it's just worth them being aware that more and more employers are beginning to pay for things that they need if the government won't fund them, and it's just worth them having those conversations with employers to find out if there is something they need and it's not funded, and whether actually they would be prepared to pay for it for their learners. Because in some cases, particularly with things like retrofit, they really are willing to pay for it and to have it delivered. So I just wanted to flag that sort of change in the way that the landscape is functioning when it comes to funding attached to qualifications and the different government departments that are now getting involved in skills. So if you've already seen our webinars on the qualification reforms, unless you've got a question, then please feel free to leave now, because I'm just going to cover what's happening with the qualification reforms, because we are going to see some changes in the qualifications you can deliver and what is available for you to deliver from 2024 onwards. So I'm just going to do a quick skip through this. So as you can see here, the overall aim of the reforms for the post-16 landscape is a simplified system that has a much reduced qualification offer, and that those qualifications result in positive outcomes for the learner and for the employers in the region in which you work and function as providers. And that means that those qualifications have to either lead to progression into a higher level of education or training, or they have to really lead into employment, or they have to offer additional specialist or cross-cutting skills to the individual learner to enable them to widen their reach and have more opportunity in terms of their career. So to do this, DfE state that they've put employers and standards at the heart of the design of technical qualifications. To be frank, I'm not entirely sure that that's absolutely true, particularly in the 19+ space, because we've got more and more employers telling us that they are really not happy with what's going to be offered in the 19+ space, and that's an interesting one. And as we know, the government does have a tendency to talk to the same old employers year in, year out, and that doesn't really cover the whole landscape in terms of what employer needs. But we will still see delivery of new reform qualification offer in classrooms from 2025. And then obviously the removal of 16 to 19 funding from qualifications that overlap or cross-cut with T-levels from 2022, 2024, 2025. And I'll show you those waves of qualifications which are being removed in a moment. And then from 2025 onwards, we'll see removal of funded qualifications in the current offer that do not meet that new criteria that I flagged. And then in addition, we've got approval of high quality small alternative academic qualifications where they add value to the A-level offer. So let's have a look at that in a little bit more detail. This is the level 3 post-2025 landscape, and these are the categories of qualifications that the government is going to be willing to fund from 2025 onwards. So in the 16 to 19 landscape, you've obviously got T-levels and apprenticeships. They're already in place, we know. But then you've got the new, well, not new, but either current qualifications that meet the technical occupational entry and technical occupational progression requirements of the DfE in areas not served by T-levels. So you're looking at qualifications here that aren't, so it could be, creative in the area of sport. There aren't currently any standards in that area. So those occupational entry and occupational progression qualifications will be available and funded. Then you've also got technical additional specialist qualifications. So these are qualifications that might enable someone to specialise. So 16 to 19, retrofit level 3, the certificate I've just flagged to you is funded for 16 to 19. It's not funded for adults. Considering it's a sort of additional specialist qualification, it's a bit annoying because realistically it's probably going to be the majority of learners that would want that are probably going to be 19+ anyway, but you could deliver it as part of a study program if you've got learners who are in the construction pathway. So technical additional specialist qualifications add specialist skills to someone who already has occupational or sector skills and qualifications in a certain area. And then you've got technical cross-cutting qualifications. So this would be things like health and safety or leadership and management, which cut across several occupational or sector subject areas. So those will all be funded as long as they meet the DFE criteria. And then for adults, you've got the T-levels again from 2027. There's a pilot going on at the moment for T-levels for adults. Whether it gets implemented will depend very, very much on the amount of take-up and whether the current pilot works. I've got big questions about that. I cannot see how a 19+ adult who is employed is really going to do a 2-year T-level because they're such a comprehensive qualification. I really don't think that 19+, that fits very well in what either employers want in that space in terms of delivery or what learners will be able to access. You may get a small cohort of learners who are unemployed that may want to do a T-level, particularly if they're thinking of going on to university at a later date. But I'm not sure that it's going to be large enough to make that worthwhile, but it's definitely one to watch. Obviously apprenticeships, and then again, you've got the technical occupational entry and technical occupational progression. Some of this may cover T-level content because it's different in the technical landscape for adults. Obviously, with adults, T-levels are not going to be so relevant. So the technical occupational entry and occupational progression may cover T-level content. So you will see technical qualifications in that space that are not T-levels. What's important about this that the DFE have announced is that those occupational entry and occupational progression, particularly the occupational entry, is some of the current qualification offer which are being submitted to the DFE for approval for delivery as part of this landscape. And these are qualifications that were already in place. Changes will be made because where you've got occupational entry qualifications and you may have someone who, for example, wants to be a bricklayer or a plumber, the DFE view is that as well as getting their bricklaying and plumbing qualifications and knowledge and skills as part of that occupational entry qualification, they also need to have wider knowledge of the construction sector. So what you will see is a qualification that isn't just covering plumbing or bricklaying or chefing. It will also cover the wider knowledge of that occupation and that sector subject area. So whereas a qualification may be something like 360 guided learning hours now, to meet that new requirement, you're probably going to see those qualifications expanding out and increasing their guided learning hours. So that's just something to be aware of, because where you may be delivering something across a span of months now or a span of timescale now, that timescale may have to increase because your tutors will be delivering more. And you also need to think about, are your tutors going to need training to enable them to deliver those qualifications? So with that technical landscape for adults, that's just something to keep in mind, because some of those qualifications which are being submitted now will change to make sure they fit with that landscape for adults when they're introduced. Then again, you've got technical employer proposed qualifications, and these are qualifications which, if a group of employers states very clearly to an awarding organisation, IFATE, we need a qualification which is going to address new skills, like, for example, the technical certificate that we've just produced to retrofit with a load of employers and a load of providers, that it should actually be funded. But obviously, IFATE want to monitor that, so our current qualification is not funded at the moment. We're really hoping that might change in the future, but we'll wait and see. But technical employer proposed qualifications will be eligible for funding, but you will have to work with an awarding organisation and with IFATE and with a group of employers to develop that qualification so that it fits within the criteria. And then again, much as you have for 16 to 19, you've got technical additional specialist qualifications which add in additional skills to an occupation, and the cross-cutting functional qualifications, which are things like leadership and management, health and safety, etc. And then that academic landscape for 16 to 19 and adults, which is the AS and the A levels, and the alternative academic qualifications taken alongside A levels. And these are sizable, chunky qualifications taken alongside, and then the large qualifications taken as an alternative to A levels. The level 2 landscape is very similar for 16 to 19. Obviously, you've got apprenticeships. You've got those occupational entry and occupational focus qualifications at level 2. Here you don't have T levels because obviously at level 2 there isn't a T level, so it's really occupational entry and apprenticeships. Those occupational entry and occupational focus will be expected to lead to employment or onto the next level, so onto a level 3 qualification from the previous slide. The technical cross-cutting skills I mentioned earlier, the technical additional specialist, but also at this level you will have ESOL and the progression to level 3 technical study type quals. Similarly, for adults, you've got the technical landscape, progression to level 3 technical study quals, apprenticeships, occupational entry and occupational focus. Again, they may be slightly larger qualifications than the ones you see now. So again, if you've got level 2 that you're delivering now to your bricklayers or your plumbers or various other sector subject areas, you might see that those qualifications have become larger and have increased guided learning hours because they've also got to include the wider sector subject knowledge alongside. The technical employer proposed, where there's no standards, ESOL, and the technical additional specialist and the technical cross-cutting skills for adults. And then again, your academic landscape at 16 to 19 for adults is progression to academic study. So these are when you will see the level 3 sectors and cycles. So introduction of the new qualifications that are being reformed that will be available for delivery alongside levels in construction, the built environment, digital, education, childcare, engineering, manufacturing, health and science coming in 2025. In 2026, you'll see the remainder of cycle 2. Technical additional qualifications in level 2 and level 3 will be introduced. And then for level 2 sectors and cycles, cycle 1 in 2025, you've got construction and the built environment, education and early years, engineering and manufacturing, health and science, and then cycle 2 in 2026 are the remaining sector subject areas. And I have worked very hard to produce this next, that's the other level 2 and below sector groups in cycle 3 and cycle 4. So cycle 3, you've got level 2 and below qualifications funded from 2027, and that's level 2 qualifications supporting progression to level 3 technical and academic study and level 3 routes, and academic subject areas reformed in 2026. And it will also include all qualifications at level 1 and entry qualifications, and obviously personal and employment PSE qualifications. And then cycle 4 in 2028 is the level 2 and below qualifications in English, Maths and ESOL, which are funded from 2028. That's group 8, and those are English, Maths, ESOL and skills for life. But actually it's much better to look at this next slide, because I've done a lot of work to get this slide in place, and we will keep this timeline up to date as things change. So in January 2023, in this year, DfE published the criteria for future level 3 qualifications. That's the criteria that awarding organisations have to meet. And if you look at the key in the top right hand side there, you'll see that grey is DfE and IFATE announcements that awarding organisations have to respond to and providers need to be aware of. Pink are awarding organisation actions, work that we've got to do to get ready and rejig our qualifications, redevelop them, make changes to the assessment criteria, increase the guided learning hours to account for additional knowledge that has to be included to make a qualification relevant for the new offer. And blue is when providers will start to see changes that you need to be aware of and need to take into consideration in your curriculum planning. So 2023 on the far left-hand side over here, we had the announcements in January and April of DfE publishing criteria for level 2 and level 3 qualifications, which our industry managers and our product team have been working very, very hard to make submissions in July for the level 3 cycle 1 subjects to be considered for funding for 2025-2026. And we've got a submission deadline for the level 2 qualifications in November, which the team are now working on to get all of our technical, occupational entry and additional specialist qualifications in cycle 1 routes for consideration for funding from September 25. And that's the level 2. So level 2, level 3, our submissions are happening at the moment, and all of our teams that work in that area are working very hard to submit qualifications too. And at some point, in hopefully early next year, around about May, DfE will publish the list of cycle 1 level 3 qualifications that we're submitting at the moment, or just submitted in July, that have been approved for funding for 2025-2026. So you as providers will see that first list in May next year for your 25-26 curriculum planning. So it should give you enough time to start thinking about curriculum, what you're going to deliver then, and planning that curriculum, what it might look like, because you'll get that list of qualifications in plenty of time to get your curriculum offer in place for 2025-2026. And then in July next year, AOs will need to submit their Cycle 2 qualifications for Level 3 subjects for delivery in 2026-2027. And then on the 1st of August 2024, you as providers will see removal of funding approval from 16 to 19 existing Level 3 technical qualifications that offer similar learning journey content and destination as a T-level. And that will be in the subject areas of construction and the built environment, digital, education and childcare, and health and science. And then in November 2024, we will be submitting our Cycle 2 Level 2 subjects for funded delivery from 26-27. Then we move over to May 2025, and you can see here the DfE publishing a list of Cycle 2 qualifications that have been approved, and that will be in preparation for your curriculum planning for 26-27. And they will publish a list of Cycle 2 Level 2 qualifications also approved for delivery from 2026-27. And then from the 1st of August 2025, you will see funding removed from existing Level 3 technical qualifications that overlap with T-levels in legal, finance and accounting, engineering and manufacturing, and business and admin. But funding then will also be removed. Sorry, I'm getting a dry throat, so I'll just take a slurp of water. Removed from qualifications not approved as part of the DfE reform for Level 2 and Level 3 in ICT, health and care, dentistry, teaching, construction and engineering, and childcare. So that would be first teaching of Cycle 1, Level 3, and Cycle 1, Level 2 approved technical occupational entry and additional specialist qualifications. And then in August the 1st, 2026, it will be first teaching of Cycle 2, Level 3 and Level 2 approved qualifications in hair and beauty, catering, hospitality, creative design, agriculture and environment, animal care and digital, and the first teaching of Level 2 in the same sector subject areas. We will update this timeline once we get the Cycle 3 and the Cycle 4 developments and as more announcements are made, and we'll show this on this timeline. And we are doing regular webinars for all of our providers on these, so do watch our website, do watch out for your focus alerts, because each time we do those, we'll update this timeline so you can see when things are happening and when things are changing and when you need to think about your curriculum planning and delivery. So that is the funding reform section, and we're just about finished on time to give us 10 minutes for questions. So I hope that was helpful. I'm just going to pop out the question box now and see if we've got any questions. Ooh, yes, we've got a few. Right, so hi, so we run qualifications in leadership and management and coaching from Level 2 to Level 7. We are currently very reactive in onboarding clients, working solely with those simply spending their money on. Where do we start the process of helping potential clients use a funded route? So if there's a question for a previous webinar. Oh crikey, Ross, that's a very long answer to a question. What it might help to do is if you and I had a conversation with our leadership and management team. So I will hopefully have your email in the registration. So if you put your email in the registration when you register for the webinar, if you're happy for me to contact you, please say yes in the questions now, and I'll fire you an email and we can have a quick catch-up session with our leadership and management team. Okay, Ross, thanks very much. We'll do that, and I'll come on board with that, and Eric and I, so we can support you with looking at where you might be able to get funding for those clients. Is this just other funding for dentistry, not including apprenticeship? Yes, this is funding outside of apprenticeships. It doesn't affect the apprenticeships. They're totally outside of these reforms, Jane. So don't worry about apprenticeships. It's just that. And we've got, yes, please, thank you, from Valentina and Ross. Are you in the same organisation? Because oh, thank you for that, guys. That's great. We'll contact you on that email and we'll get something in place with our leadership management team, and we'll have a conversation with you sometime in the next couple of weeks. Are you aware of the advanced learner loans will still be available for the foreseeable future? Yes, Karen, they will be, but it is going to change in 2025, and we'll do a webinar on this next year, because in 2025, the lifelong loan entitlement is supposedly coming in. I'm not hugely hopeful about that lifelong loan entitlement, so it will change the advanced learner loan offer, and it will only be offered at Level 3 because the LLE, the lifelong loan entitlement, will come in and we'll be doing the offer at Level 4, 5 and 6, and we will be doing more about that because we're expecting some announcements about the lifelong loan entitlement later next year. So watch out for those. We'll put out focus alerts and tell you when the webinar's coming, so you can find out exactly what's going to happen, what it's going to look like, and what you might have to do. But for the foreseeable future, yes, it is available. One thing you will need to be aware of, though, is if obviously qualifications are removed as part of the reforms, they may no longer be available for the level 3 loan. So you will see that loan offer change, and qualifications are going to drop off it. And we've had a couple drop off this year because they don't meet the new qualification approval principles for the loan offer going forward, in link to those reforms that I've just spoken to you about. So do watch the offer and what the advanced learner loan qualifications are, because that will change, and that's available in our City and Guilds funding qualification catalogue, which you can download from our website under funding for qualifications in the adult area. You can download that spreadsheet. It does tell you which of our level 3 qualifications and level 4 and 5 at the moment are available in the loan offer. There's a separate tab for that. Got a question from Stuart here. We might answer this offline, Stuart, because we're getting close to the timing now. Apprenticeship funding was extra support for small employers. We asked our DFE ESFA contact on whether this waiver now covers all age groups, which is confirmed, but we've had a question saying it still only accounts for 16 to 18 or 19 plus for education, health and care plan. Any advice? I'll come back to you on that, Stuart, if that's okay. We can have an offline conversation, and Eric and I'll give you a buzz, if that's okay. Yes, thanks. You've just popped up, no problem. Thank you. That's great. That's no more questions, guys. So thank you very much for joining. I do hope that was helpful. You've got a few minutes back in your morning, so go and grab a cup of tea or whatever it is you want to do. Thanks very much for joining us. We will send out the slides and recording in the next couple of days, and we'll look forward to seeing you hopefully at our next webinar. Thanks very much. Bye.